Steve, quickly, if we could just go back to the fluorescent orange. I think maybe what we might want to look at is during those overlaps, doing either just a straight up orange hat when you're moving or something voluntary. Can we look at that? Is that better for you?
Yeah.
Let's look at that and see what we can do. I don't know, do we have to wait for Director Burhands? Okay, let's roll. Tom?
Hey, good morning, Commissioners. Tom McKibben, I'm the GIS Administrator for the agency. And back in October of last year, the agency started looking at putting together a mobile application for the game land. And one of the things they asked me was, what data do we have to support it? Our focus at the time was collecting the inventory of all the game lands, not so much focused on the hunters. So my boss, Deanna, asked me to take a look at the hunting on PA State Forest, which was an application, a website developed by the Game Commission, or by DCNR, and they're having all our information basically out there. So one of the things was, let's talk to them and see what they're doing and what we can do to make it joint. So working with Mark Niesner, who's the coordinator down in Habitat Management, we got together. He set up meetings with Joe Petrosky, over at DCNR, and we started the discussion about creating a joint effort. And I'll introduce Mark. He can tell us more about the efforts, and then Joe.
So basically what we were looking at first was just the data sharing aspect of it. And we realized that not only were we putting time, effort, and trying to maintain two different systems and giving two different looks, we were confusing hunters by this different appearance. We had different colors, different style of shape, identifying things. Our buttons were up here, their buttons were down here. It became confusing. And we thought maybe we could save time and money and cause less confusion if we shared this map and made it a joint project using both our expertise on our lands. And it proceeded into what I think is a very good project. One of the things you have to be careful of when designing these is you don't overcomplicate the map and people can't figure out how to use it. So we knew we wanted more than a street map that you pick up in a garage. We didn't want a field guide that nobody's going to take in the woods and put to use unless you really focus on a particular aspect. So we wanted to build a gazetteer. People carry these in their cars all the time because it gives them some information, gets them started, but it's not intended to be the turkey finding spot or the deer finding spot. It's a hunting spot. So I know for me, when I get told I have to go northwest, my family, for a wedding or something, the first thing I do is start trying to figure out where I can go hide. This map will help you do it and get some hunting in at the same time. So at that point, Emily was the one who I think brought up the point we presented to you guys so you knew what we were rolling out before it got rolled out. And she was a big part of it, so she's here. And I think Joe's going to do the presentation for you so you can see what the map can do.
Yeah, good morning. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the current site, which is what's up live on the public internet right now. So that is the map as it was last year. It is interactive. You can zoom in and out.
Sorry, Joe, I think he'll hear you better if you click that.
Okay. Gotcha. Maybe I'll just hold it if that's okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, so you can zoom in and out. You can click on features and get information and driving directions and the like. And there's a whole list of tools over on the side, including map layers. We have the bear check stations, the offices, roads that are open for hunters, elk zones, lots of different GIS layers that you can turn on and off. We have a special section for chronic wasting disease that shows different layers specific to chronic wasting disease. Useful links for hunters, bookmarks where they can zoom to different state forests. They can add their own GPS data if they'd like. All the seasons and bag limits are listed with filters where they can choose different different species to filter for what's in season. And the antler restrictions are there as well. You can click on the map and see where the antler restrictions are spatially. The hunting hours are also displayed spatially, so you can actually zoom in and see what the exact hunting times are along the top in each specific meridian. And some data about deer harvests and antlerless license allocations for the past almost 10 years or so. So that's what the current site offers. So as Tom and Mark had mentioned, over about the past 6 months, we've been working together and integrated the state game lands this year. So what I'm going to do now is show you, this site is not currently live, but this will be the new site coming up in about a week. So what we've done is we've integrated, first of all, we've changed the URL. The URL is now going to be www.hunting.pa.gov. So it's kind of a neutral site. It's no longer a DCNR site. We have the Game Commission logo up here as well, and the DCNR logo over on this side. The layers that we've added the regional offices for the Game Commission, and you can click on those. We've also added all the game lands, of course, and the game land boundaries. Everything is pretty much integrated across the two land bases, state game lands and state forest. So now when you turn on the roads open for hunting, it not only shows the roads open for state forest, but also the ones on state game lands, and it's pretty much seamless. Same thing with the habitat layers and the timber harvests. You can turn those on. If we zoom in a little closer, these are the timber harvests for state game lands, and here's the ones for state forest. It's the same thing. Everything is integrated across the habitat types too, the aspen, the winter thermal cover, herbaceous openings, and oak forests. You can get map layers of all of those so you can plan your hunt. And we've also added some bookmarks for game lands in particular. If you want to zoom to a specific game lands number, you can click on that and it will zoom you right to it. We had the same thing for lots of other categories. And all the other functionality still works as well. So now if you're hunting a particular state game lands and you want to see what the hunting hours are, you can still click on the hunting hours and zoom in and see where that game lands is in relation to the meridians and find out those exact hunting hours. So really the whole purpose of this map is because hunters are a very important resource to help controlling the wildlife populations, and we want to give them good tools to be able to utilize the information and get them out there and work with them on stuff. So that's the whole purpose of the map, and one of the biggest, it's been around for a few years now. One of the biggest comments we've gotten from hunters is they wanted to see the game lands too, because you guys have 1.5 million acres. So we now have a map that's a total of 3.7 million acres of public lands open to hunters in Pennsylvania. And I think it's probably one of the best sites out of any state in the nation that's out there for a hunter resource. So our plan is to make this site here go live within the next week or so in preparation for when the digest goes out and new hunting licenses go on sale. So this will now say hunting in PA in 2018 to 2019 when we post live on the internet. Any questions or yes? Oh yes, it does also.
Brilliant.
So the site is fully mobile compatible. It's a little bit squished on a phone, but it definitely still works. You can get to all the functionality, and it is can certainly use it in your tree stand if you have cell coverage or a data plan, and it works on mobile devices too.
Now, is this, I don't know if you're the right person to ask or if it's Deanna, but is this going to replace essentially the Go Hunt? Because, you know, Go Hunt also had fluorescent orange requirements, and is this going to replace that old Go Hunt application?
Keep in mind, this is a website.
Right.
Okay. So we are working on the mobile app for the agency. We hope to have that released sometime in September. So what that'll do is integrate with the same information that you're seeing here.
Okay.
So the Go Hunt PA app is getting replaced by the new agency mobile app.
This is perfect.
Yeah.
This is perfect. This is exactly what, I don't know about anyone else, exactly what I was looking for that we can put on that app that just makes access simple, brilliant.
Yep, there's lots of other enhancements too. We have a whole list. This year, the primary focus was to integrate game lands and state forest. So there's lots of other public lands that are opportunities too, and there's a whole lot of other functionality that we can add. More data layers for hunters. As Mark mentioned though, the key is to keep it organized and simple, because if it gets too complex, then the hunter gets lost and they get distracted from the site and they don't find what they're looking for and they leave. So we need to make sure we keep the focus good, but there's plenty of work ahead for all of us here, I think, to keep the site, make more useful information on the site as well.
Great. So like, I guess Deanna again, like the pheasant stalking areas, is that something we'll be able to integrate onto this, or is that something we'll have to do separately?
Tom, are you guys putting that in a layer on this or not?
We have it is on our list. We don't currently have the pheasant stalking set up on our system either. So we're getting the final details on that before how we're going to present that. So yeah, the pheasant stalking will be duck zones, all those different special regs areas, those kind of things we have plans to bring in. It's just a matter of time and materials available to implement something like that.
Because again, a one-stop shopping for the hunter is just, it's perfect, brilliant.
Is other public lands like Allegheny National Forest on that, or is there plans to integrate that if it's not?
I'm not some of them it is. I mean, we have it.
Yeah, they show up on the base map, but there's no habitat data for those areas or whatnot. The roads that might be open for hunters don't show on that, but it's certainly another opportunity, again, that we could engage them if we wanted and if we got their data as well. The other nice thing we've set up is the data is coming from both Game Commission and from DCNR, and Tom can control all of his data layers there on his site, and they feed right into the map. We control ours, so if we want to make an update, we can make an update to our data and it updates the map. Tom can do the same thing, so there's no back and forth of controlling it in one place and waiting for somebody to come through too.
Right. Sweet.
Just a switch.
Anybody, any comments, any questions? I appreciate the presentation. You have no idea how happy everybody is up here. That's exactly what we've been looking for I think, a long time.
Nice cooperative effort too.
It is, absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Show sheds to hunt off of too. Yeah, do they have that? Do they have sheds that you can hunt off of? Yeah.
So this is all going to be on an app, or I mean, will you get that if you just
Yeah,
go
but
to
it's hotter
the
than
state?
that.
Right now, it's just on the website, but eventually when we have the new app, it'll be able to bring that in.
Bureau of Wildlife Management.
Good morning, guys. We're going to follow up that fun presentation with another fun one on chronic wasting disease.
Moving on to Air Gun Sporting Association. All right.
So we'll do a little CWD update and then ask Ian to give an update on the turkey plan. Mary Jo and Ian have been at work at this for about a year now, and so we've gotten quite a bit done, and we're moving along in the process. And so I wanted Ian to update you guys on that and let you know where it is and what
Good.
we need from you guys.
Well, we'll try to make it very fast, painless, and simple, but I'm not sure if that will work, but we'll try.
Bring us some good
I
news.
was going to say, says, Wayne, nothing is ever fast and painless.
It's painless, fast. Just to give you an idea here, these are the numbers of samples that we've taken since sampling began back in 1988 for CWD. And you notice 2017, 70. I gotta blow something up. Just a second, guys. blown up now. So you can see 7919 was the total number from this past year. We had 1,600 in the drop boxes. So you can see the drop box samples made up the large portion of that increase that we had. So we've tested on the order of 68,000 since we started. So just looking at the breakdown this, for this past year, there you see the 7919 on the bottom right. We had 78 positives, with 3 of those being up in DMA 3, the other 75 being in DMA 2. And you can see Hunter Harvest being 43 out of those, and Roadkill being next highest with 26. And you can see the number of samples for those. And again, that's for both DMAs. So if we just look at DMA 2, you can see again the history through time, and you can see this past year the 43, 26 roadkill, 5 suspect, and then we shot that one deer during targeted removal down in Frank when we did that Fulton County shoot in January of 2017. So you can see roadkills and Hunter Harvest had been, pretty similar. You'd have to look at the number of samples for each, but not far off in terms of samples. So 2017, here you actually can see the number of samples for each category. It's 3,297 total for DMA2 of all samples, with 1,758 of those being roadkill versus 1,475 for Hunter Harvest. So a little more roadkill than Hunter Harvest. And you can see the proportions of those that were positive. But really the most important thing is you look at the Hunter Harvest column, because now this is just DMA2. So in DMA2, of all the deer that were sampled in DMA2 when Hunter Harvest, 2.9%, just about 3% of those were positive. And then of course DMA3, we had 3 free-ranging deer that were positive and up in DMA3. So this is the boundary that we had for 2017 for DMA2. And here you see the new positives that have shown up in DMA2. Now the problem one is the one that you can see up by that, about, 770, little number there to the, about 1 o'clock.
Where are you at?
2 o'clock, you see it?
Do you have somebody have a laser pointer?
It's almost in the middle, but to the
Just a
right.
second.
Oh, okay.
I'll give you a laser pointer view.
770.
So it's
Okay, on the right.
Yeah. You come down here and take a look right up here, right about right there, see that red dot? There you go. She's got one. This here red dot right here is the problem that we have, because that will require
That's the Fulton County?
increase the area. Now, there's peculiarities in that one, because if you drive down the turnpike, and just before you go under the tunnel of Tuscarora Mountain, if you look up to your right on the top of that ridge, that's where that deer was, right on a hairpin 180-degree turn in a little parking spot. Don't feel right to me, but at any rate, we've got a positive there.
So is there a fenced farm operation in that area?
Here, and here, there are 3 recently quarantined, ex-quarantine farms that were quarantined after that farm in Bedford County was depopulated.
So again, we get a deer that, without a doubt, had to come out of one of those fenced farms, and there's not a thing we can do about it.
But we can't prove it. And so, that's one of the things that we don't have any law enforcement capability, because we can't pursue anything that has to do with captive service. So we can't even ask questions about that.
When's the legislature going to wake up?
Well, we will be talking to them on the 14th. So at any rate, you'll see that we're proposing an expansion up into that area. Now, we don't, I'm shooting in the wrong direction, I think. It died on me. I think that's me or it.
Sorry. If I can find another one. Oh, no, here it
Wayne, it just becomes frustrating, because, earlier we talked about decreasing the size of the DMA, and then we have all these
Right.
these deer that are just popping up all over the place.
Yes. And of course, we're discussing internally. I mean, the reason why we have a major concern with increasing the size of DMAs, because we already saw from the positives that we have a high concentration of positives in this area. So if we're expanding it out, especially if we expand out a DMA that expands into an area where there truly, say, was no infection, now we open it up to allow anybody who taken deer here with high-risk fires. Now they have a license to take these anywhere they want within
Right.
this area. So, but then we're also looking at the potential risk of, okay, baiting and feeding and urine are also part of that ban. So if we truly did have an infection over here based upon that, then, and we failed to put that in place, then we would then open it up to allow for baiting, feeding, and urine to be a potential method of increasing CWD. So we got risk factors on both sides, but right now we don't really have too many options in terms of picking and choosing amongst those.
Can you back up one slide to that slide that showed the points? Why are we continuing to add to the DMA when we have a flyer like that? Can we not create a DMA?
Well, what we've discussed, and we're talking about putting a DMAP unit in right in this area.
Right.
Where we'd put in new drop boxes and try to enhance our sample size there to determine whether or not truly we had an infection there. We had, we kicked around, and again, we'd have to change policy if we were to do this, but we kicked around the thought that, okay, if we put a DMAP unit in there and increase the permits, we could apply a parts ban to that without putting some of the other restrictions on. But then now all of a sudden, if we keep monkeying around like that, then we have a lot of different constructs, and we don't have a solid base in terms of a protocol for us to refer to and to explain to the public when we decide we're going to take one action or another. So that's kind of the conundrum we have, and we're discussing that internally right now. But
So again, what are the details on that positive? It was on public-private land?
no, it's roadkill.
It's a
Deer.
roadkill.
Roadkill deer. It's on a hairpin turn on the highway that's right up on the top of Tuscarora Ridge.
It's on top of the mountain.
Top of the mountain.
So what is like hunting accessibility?
I don't know. I
So
don't know.
creating a DMAP may or may not even get us the information that we need. If it's on top of that mountain, I mean,
Oh, but
what's the
we
access?
probably
What region
have,
is that?
I
Whose
mean,
region
you
is
know
that?
how steep that ridge is.
He's not here.
Oh, all right.
Brad here?
No, he's not here.
Steep ridge, so it's not very wide. So my guess is that there might be opportunities to put drop boxes down on the flat on either side of that. And I know that the South Central is already looking at locations there.
Okay.
So anyhow, so that is the problem there, and we have defined this, but again, this is preliminary. Brian hasn't, we haven't done the turn by turn, and Brian hasn't put it into effect yet. So this is a proposal at this point in time. So now if we look at DMA 3, as you're aware, we found 3 positives. The one up here, actually, the first one that came to our attention was the one on Game Lands 87. Here, the one that we had the targeted shoot on. Actually, the first one, which was this one up here on 322, up in the extreme northwest portion of the area, that was taken as a roadkill. And then this one down here was an archery harvest, where an archer took the buck, took it to the butcher, and his father was nervous about the appearance of the deer after the fact. Went back to the butcher, got the head and put it into one of our drop boxes, and it turned up the positive that was here. Now these are pretty far apart. It's like 15, 16, 17 miles between these two, 7.5 miles down here. So reminiscent of the first 3 cases we got down in DMA 2, where they were about 10 miles apart, which is, that's troubling to me, because it doesn't suggest that you have an infection that's growing out from a single source point. So this is what it looked like last year, and the proposal this year would be to extend it in this area. I'll flip back and forth between them. I tried to scale them so that they were, oops. I tried to scale them the same so that you can see how it grows. See, the roads stay the same. So it's growing because of the one to the northwest and growing because of the one to the south.
So we're real close. I mean, I'm looking, there's Canberra County at the bottom of that.
Yeah.
We're real close to just merging those 2 DMAs.
Well, so quite a ways, but once again, I would advise.
Quite a ways, but I mean, if you look at the jumps,
Right.
it's not that far.
No, but it continues to scare me that we increase our DMAs too much, too far, and that simply gives license to move high-risk parts around. Because you figure if the whole state was a DMA, it's the same thing as having no DMA in terms of high-risk parts movement. So those are things to think about.
That's
That's
what I'm,
Those red lines.
right.
So the 1,600 Dropbox samples that we had, more than, I got back something like 965, I think, locations from those where the hunters were asked to put in the UTM 1 kilometer grid box and send those back to give locations. These are the non-positives that came back. They all came back non-positives. No additional ones were taken up there. So you can see the kind of distribution that we had. So that would be more than 400 samples there with no positives. Now the little, where we did our targeted shoot, you see this polygon here, a little blue polygon. You see the red dot where the positive deer was taken within that. And within that area, after the season's closed, we took 126 deer out of that 3.6 square mile polygon. You also see the little red ones in there. Those are 14 Dropbox deer that tested negative that were also, when they sent back their UTM grids, those deer fell within that polygon. So we tested a total of 140 deer from within that polygon, and none of them were positive. And then, here in May, after the shooting was all done, we sent the team with the Penn State folks that were doing our FLIR study for our research project down in DMA 2. We sent them up there on one night to take a look and see what they found, we could see for live deer. And they observed 50 deer at those locations. You can see the little numbers saying how many deer were in the group. They observed 50 deer remaining within the polygon. So at a minimum count, we had 126 after season plus 50. That's 176, and they didn't see them all that night, so probably a good guess is on the order of 200 deer postseason in that polygon. So the bottom line is, I can tell you the statistics, but if any positive deer was in the area when we did the sharpshooting, they were mighty few and far between. Actually, at a sample size of 126 out of 200, we had about a 1.5. We had a 95% chance of detecting at least one deer if it was at a 1.5% level, which means that if there were 3 positive deer out of the 200, we should have gotten 1. This begs the question, where did the positive come from? And again, this positive was a suspect animal, meaning that someone called in to the regional office, a game warden was deployed to take that deer and was able to find that deer, which suggests that it had been towards the final stages of CWD. So how did it exist on the landscape, having that many deer there and not infect anything is a problem. Now we got DNA samples from all these deer. We have DNA samples from the positive deer. We have not started the process of getting those analyzed yet, but those samples will be going to Penn State, which has been doing DNA work for us. And we hope to have some better idea of relationships among those deer and whether or not that positive deer appear to be part of that population or not. And there's also some other researchers out there that might even be able to use that data to help us reconstruct and get another population estimate based upon the variation in the genetics of those deer. But that's going to be down the road a ways, probably another year before we can give you good results on that. So captive farms, the Lancaster farm was depopulated a few weeks ago. There were 37 deer remaining on the farm. They found one additional positive, which means that they started out with 40. I believe the one was found in Wisconsin. Subsequently, another one died on the farm down in Lancaster. And then during the depopulation, they found one more. So maybe it was 39. So at any rate, they found 3 out of about 39 deer. It's not been announced yet. PDA will be announcing another positive farm. They notified us last week that there's another one. It's an HMP herd. It's not a certified herd. It's a shooting operation, as opposed to the Lancaster farm, which was an HCP herd. And it's up here. You can see it. I put it on the map, so it's up in, I believe that's Blair County. I think it's the township of Greenfield or Greenville. It's about 5 miles from the original, one of the original 3 positives from 2012. Now, all 4, so right now we have 4 positive farms. We have the Franklin County farm, where we did the shoot this spring also. We shot 43 deer right in the immediate vicinity of that farm. We found no positives there, which was good news. The Fulton County farm, which has been on the landscape now, positive for at least a year and a half, has a couple hundred deer or more on that facility. And this farm here, the Bedford County farm that was depopulated this spring, this farm is near that farm and is on the landscape positive. And now we have a farm up here.
Do we know what the delay is in a depopulation?
The issue is that USDA provides indemnity money, and in the case of the Lancaster farm, it was far away from any other infection, so it got high priority in terms of the USDA giving them any money. And my understanding is USDA provided about $80,000 for indemnity there. Because these are within our disease management area, it seems that we don't have high priority, and there's not enough money. Congress hasn't appropriated money for indemnity. And so no state money has been made available for indemnity, so they remain on the landscape at this point in time with no plans that I'm aware of to depopulate. They're all single fenced, except for the Franklin County farm, which put up double electrical fences after they were found positive. They seemed to do quite a good job of putting fence in. I think they cost an extra $100,000 put the fence in that they put in. So they did good, and that's a good thing because we haven't got any positives in between there right now, and that's a pretty big area. So I'm short.
So we've had conversation with both the governor's office and the legislature about moving forward as far as their assistance with chronic waste. Let's just not let off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a critical issue, and especially with these positive farms in the landscape that have single fencing, we know the risk of transferring disease back and forth it's there, and it's very frustrating to see things that are absolutely a huge danger and nothing can be done.
And just going back to the shoot just for a second, I had Josh, our biostatistician, run the statistics on that 126 sample. I asked him to flip it on its head and say, okay, if there was 1.5% 3 positive deer amongst the 200. Given the size of that sample, 126, what would be the probability of us getting all 3? And that was about 37%. So I would like to have some of the statisticians run some more modeling on that kind of things, because when we talk about trying to blink something out, you know, we took, if there was, again, 200 deer or 170, if there was just the 176, meaning that the 126 plus the 50 we actually saw, then we would have taken about 70% of those. It's probably less than that, meaning that we took less than 70% of the deer. So what proportion of the deer herd is enough for us to have a reasonable chance of blinking out an infection? And if not on the first time, then what about repeated, you know, some years apart? 3 years, you know, if you did it 1 year, 3 years later, 4 years later, did it again, 3 or 4 years later, did it again. And it seems to me with the magnitude of that number, hopefully if the modeling might bear that out, it might give us some idea as what kind of effort would have to be put on the ground in order to, over the long run, be able to blink out an infection that was very low prevalence level on the landscape.
Wayne, I want to bring up on your targeted shoot something that's overlooked that's really important. Just because you didn't detect any CWD doesn't mean it wasn't there.
That's right.
It just we weren't able to detect it at those levels. And one of the keys with these targeted shooting operations is if there is infected deer that aren't testing positive just because they haven't had it long enough, you're at least getting those out of the population. And those are intense enough where hopefully we can get a handle on it in those areas.
Yeah. So deer start dying 18 to 24 months after infection. But the first 6 months, within the first 6 months, many deer may not be testable. They may be infected, but the infections have not affected the lymph nodes and the brainstem enough so that you actually can detect it, given the methods that we have online right now. There's new methods that are coming forward that may be a lot more sensitive in the future, which may give us a better idea. So we did get 2 6-month-old fawns this year that tested positive. Now Michigan also got a couple of fawns that tested positive also. So we know that, you know, infections that are, you know, acquired either at birth or before birth or near birth can begin to be detected, at least some of them, at least by 6 months. Now what they don't know is dosage level, if dosage level has something to do with how rapidly they get to a state where you can actually detect it in the lymph nodes. But that kind of research is underway or is being proposed right now. And we have been talking with the USGS lab about potentially helping to fund them on some of the research on this.
I'm not going to say thank you. See you.
That's all right.
It's more and more frustrating every time.
Well, it makes you angry. We can't be the only ones that are angry about this situation. And with these flyers popping up, we can't be the only ones saying they're coming from a specific location. So what's it take to get the legislature to understand that they're in charge of the problem? And if they can't, if they're not strong enough or strong-willed enough to fix the problem, then it will never be fixed, and what we do doesn't mean a damn thing. And that's what it comes down to. All right.
Matthew, you want to move on?
Yeah. Something a little more upbeat, right?
I think it's a little more upbeat. Although I'll start out with adding to the tales of woe that were told earlier today. Our bureau didn't add much to the harvest either. Matthew's got his tag. I didn't use either.
Both tags. I bought 2 tags.
Even Bob Boyd didn't use a tag, even though he's got a gobbler still down on a sand mound, I think. So
miserable.
So wait, the question then becomes: did we all have the same guide?
Hey, he gave me some advice.
My hunter got his turkey.
But despite our collective experience here in this room, in the big picture, Pennsylvania remains a very high-quality turkey hunting state. We maintain some of the highest hunter numbers and harvests for turkeys in the whole country. So it's certainly not like we have a broken turkey management plan that needs to be fixed, but we do have the more than 10-year-old turkey management plan that does need to be updated. And the revision process has actually been going on for more than a year at this point. About a year and a half ago, Mary Jo was at one of the working group meetings and kind of gave an overview of where we're headed with this next revision. Obviously, that was even before the time when a couple of the current commissioners were on the board. So I'll just very briefly hit a couple of the highlights of where we've been and where this plan is going, and then where we're at in the timeline and where we hope to finish up. This revision is actually our third turkey management plan. The first one was written in 1995 and ran through about 2005. Probably the key element with that one was we were completing the wild turkey restoration across the state, so trap and transfer into areas that had suitable habitat, but at that point didn't have wild turkey populations. The second iteration of our plan, which was finalized in 2006 and 2017, we sort of shifted to an intensive research phase. We did 4-year gobbler and hen research studies with a lot of banding and telemetry to look at harvest rates and survival rates and movements. And so a big part of this third generation plan that we're moving into now for 2018 through 2027 is to take a lot of that information that we've gained in the previous plans to continue and build on that to make our program even better. But again, it's a common thread of similar approach, and in fact our overarching goal statement for the 2018 to 2027 plan is exactly the same as it was in the previous plan, and that is to provide optimum wild turkey populations in suitable habitats throughout Pennsylvania for hunting and viewing recreation by current and future generations. Within that overarching goal statement then, as I mentioned, one of our big focuses in this plan is to use a lot of the information that we've gained to develop particularly a more structured decision process for making our recommendations for fall turkey seasons. From the hunter standpoint of what comes out, seasons probably won't look that much different from what they are currently, but the process that we're using to get there will be new and improved. It should be more consistent and more transparent to get to the recommendations that we bring to the board each year for fall turkey seasons. From the habitat standpoint, we'll sort of be continuing something that's already happened, and that's to take a more large-scale landscape level approach to habitat management. So instead of doing food plots, it'll be more like large-scale prescribed fire and that type of thing. Again, that's something that we're already doing. This is a very comprehensive plan. There's a total of 59 strategies, and even though our Bureau of Wildlife Management is sort of the point bureau for putting it together and implementing it, there are things that touch every bureau in the agency. So we talked about hunter safety a little bit earlier. There's hunter safety elements to the plan, hunter surveys to determine hunter opinions and hunter attitudes, law enforcement aspects, wild turkey protection aspect, educational programs, continuing cooperative partnerships with the National Wild Turkey Federation and other partners and so forth. So it's a very comprehensive plan. A couple things more in the sort of plan logistics that'll be a little bit different than previous plans. First of all, we've written it to segregate out some of the strategies that we definitely expect to be able to accomplish with existing resources from a few others that we would really like to do, but we may require additional resources to accomplish. And hopefully that'll make it easier to communicate a little bit about what we do and don't accomplish under the plan. I know that's been a sore point with some of the other species management plans in the past, where we have a long list of goals and objectives, and in some cases haven't been able to meet a lot of them because we don't have the resources to do that. In this case, we're hoping to more clearly define those things that are maybe beyond our reach at this point, but that we'd like to be able to get to. And another thing that we're just in the very early stages of talking about with the Bureau of Information and Education is to put together, recognizing that this is probably going to be a 100-page plan, give or take, and a lot of people aren't going to want or have the time to read all through it. We'd like to maybe put together a brief overview video that could be used for the board and for the general public to just sort of hit these highlights of what is a species management plan, how do we use it, where have we come from in the past, and where are we going with this one in the future. So that's something that, again, we're in the early stages of discussing with INE. We hope that'll be an improvement for this plan process. And if it works well, it might be something we could carry forward with some of the other species management plans that we'll be revising here in the next few years. Then moving on to the timeline, we just completed approximately a 1-month internal review period. Those comments were due back to Matthew, myself, and Mary Jo by last Friday. So even as we speak today, Mary Jo is beginning to work on revisions to the draft plan that are incorporating those internal comments. The next step that we'd like to do then, as we typically do with these management plans, is to release it for public comment. That would probably be for a 60-day period. When exactly we release it depends a little bit on how long it takes to incorporate those revisions from internal review, but hopefully by the end of June, certainly. And then so that would take roughly till the end of August to get all the public comments in. We'd provide a summary of those public comments to the board in advance of the September commission meeting, and probably also a presentation at the meeting, just sort of summarizing where we've been, where we're going, what the comments were, and how we responded to those comments. And then we'd be anticipating requesting formal acceptance of the plan by the board at the September commission meeting. So that's sort of where things stand at this point, and I can take any questions if there are any.
Questions? Jim, nothing?
Well, I mean, I think the obvious is the turkey population really exploded, and it's come down some from where it was. Do we still believe that we have turkeys in all suitable habitats? That was what the National Wild Turkey Federation's goal was at one time, to make sure that we do. And then I guess the other end of that scale is, do we now have an urban turkey issue just like we do with deer?
I mean, such thing.
Well, you know, it is amazing how many people have detected problems with turkeys. I don't know if that's going to be addressed.
That is actually, and obviously with 59 strategies, I had to pick and choose what I was going to include, but there is an element of urban turkey, nuisance turkey management within the plan that'll be included. And going back to your first question, I think we do have at least some turkeys in all suitable habitat. In some areas, we don't have the numbers that we'd like. And as you referenced, we sort of, when that first management plan in the late 90s, early 2000s was written, that one was sort of, you could almost do no wrong in turkey management because populations were steadily increasing. In the early 2000s is when they peaked in Pennsylvania. Since that time, they've declined somewhat, and now they're kind of fluctuating statewide around a sort of a lower new normal. And that's really why I emphasize the fall season management, because that's, although there's a gazillion factors that play into those population trends, the one thing that we control most directly is hen mortality during the fall season. So that's going to continue to be a major focus.
Good. So, a couple questions, and just being a new turkey hunter, I did get my turkey this year. Not Brian.
Common denominator.
You had a knowledgeable guide, apparently.
There was a shed involved, though.
What's the prognosis with the weather that we're dealing with for turkey poult survival? And does that affect what we do in our seasons coming up?
Two-part answer, I guess. There always is an effect of weather on poult survival, and really we're getting into the critical time right now. The weather that we had in May didn't affect that so much, but now is when we're really starting to get poults start to hatch and be out on landscape. So that's a sustained period of cold, wet weather in these next few weeks is always a bad thing for reproduction. And obviously that varies. It's never consistent across the whole state, so it's somewhat localized like all weather is. It is something we keep an eye on, and we'll be looking to incorporate it in some fashion into the structured decision-making model that we use to recommend the fall seasons. The problem with it is just the way the timing of season setting is. This fall seasons were already set in January and April before we knew what that weather would be. So we're kind of going to have to we aren't going to really be able to course correct for any one particular year based on that year's weather, but we'll have to take a look back at what the trends have been and sort of look for the sweet spot in the long term, recognizing that some years maybe that'll be a little more conservative than it needs to be. Some years it may be a little more liberal than ideal, but if we can maintain seasons that match up with reproduction over the long-term average, then over the long term we should be maintaining sustainable populations.
Are we looking to increase the population? Or are we looking to just maintain the
That's another thing that I didn't get into just for the sake of time. To some extent, we'll probably have WMU specific goals. So in some, there will be a goal to increase the population in that unit. Others would be to stabilize, and perhaps in some of the more urban units, it might even be to reduce the population to deal with some of those nuisance issues that Jim referenced.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Matthew.
What is an urban nuisance?
Deer. Oh, just when they get in trouble. Scratching on flower beds, roasting on your roof, your BMW. Yeah, some people get worked up about them. By cars. They're chasing kids around.
Yeah,
the
they will
goblins
chase
can
kids.
yeah, that's always fun to watch.
Open mic moment.
No, it is. I watch the YouTube videos all the time.
Ready for me to go?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, let me say thanks, first of all, for giving us some time here on the agenda this morning, and hopefully all of you will be able to be out at the range this afternoon, and we'll have some fun and get a chance to get your hands on some of this equipment. I don't have any handouts other than my card, but I'm sure that we can make this presentation available to you if you want to delve into it a little deeper and get back to me with any questions you might have. Let me start off by first introducing the Airgun Sporting Association. It is, I won't say relatively new, I will say it's brand new. We've only been in operation now for about 6 months, and it is a 501c6 trade association. Its members are most of the major manufacturers and or importers of air guns and air gun shooting equipment, and I am currently the president and CEO of that organization. My name again is Mitch King. I came to this job. Before this job, I spent 30 years working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, so I'm an agency type person. And during that time, I worked quite heavily with state fish and wildlife agencies on, and part of my tour was in a senior executive service position overseeing the wildlife and sport fish restoration programs, the excise tax issues, stuff like that. I left the Fish and Wildlife Service about 11 years ago, and I spent 10 years with the Archery Trade Association, and contracted with them to do their government relations work, working with state wildlife agencies there. So I have a pretty strong history of working with state wildlife agencies on a whole variety of issues, whether it be regulations or whatever. The Airgun Sporting Association, I mean, since it is a trade organization, its #1 mission is to promote the industry. I won't pull any punches there. That's what we're all about. But when you talk to the industry, our industry members, and ask them what we do, they say the best way to promote our industry is to promote air gun hunting across the country. And that's when they came to me and asked me if I would help based on my experience working with state agencies. And I told them that I would help, but got it? I told them I would help, but that my first and foremost approach and strategy is to work with state agencies. A lot of folks like to first go straight to the legislature, and I'm not. I don't care too much for that approach. I want to work with you guys. I want to try to figure out what you want, and then if there is some need for legislative initiatives in some states, they can't do anything when it comes to big game hunting, deer hunting, without having legislative initiative with it, we can help with that. But besides promoting air gun hunting, there's a couple of other priorities that I think are important to mention, and I'll touch on a little bit later in my presentation. One is the recreational and hunter and recreational shooter recruitment. I know this agency, as well as agencies across the country, are involved in what we call the R3 initiative, recruitment, retention, and reactivation. And I think air guns have a role to play there. I'll talk about that later. And then clarifying and improving state regulations. Sometimes it takes another set of eyes to look at a set of regulations and say, yeah, you may think it says this, but this might be what the reader is looking at when they read it. And so we can talk about that some more as well. I heard you all talking today about this particular issue when it came to hunter orange, when there's hunter responsibilities out there, and there's regulations, and you can't regulate ethics. We all know that. You have to have some dependency on a responsible hunter picking up a piece of equipment, because irresponsible hunters can take the best equipment in the world and make it look like the equipment's a problem. I'm a bow hunter, and I know that firsthand. A lot of folks I've met maybe shouldn't have taken those kinds of shots or whatever, but finding that balance is important, and I'm glad you guys are dealing with that and recognizing the role of hunter responsibility in your regulations. As I read them, and this comes with the clarification of the regs, I think you all are pretty clear in what you in the regs when I read them on small game, what's allowed, what isn't allowed. I'm not quite sure exactly why the .22 caliber or larger restriction on woodchuck, but maybe you got some big woodchuck here that need that. But bottom line, I think things look pretty good from an air gun standpoint about what's allowed for small game. For big game, again, you're pretty clear. No air guns can be used for big game, and I think this is something that I want to talk to you a little bit more about. Hopefully, we can figure out a way forward on this particular issue, because Pennsylvania is a big state. Hunting. Okay. Well, maybe we'll try it here. Is that better? Good. Perfect. Thank you. This is what I read when it comes to firearms in your regulations for big game. Deer, centerfire rifles, centerfire handguns. Pretty straightforward and clear there, I believe. And for elk, you've got a little bit more restrictions on bullet weight and at least having a 22 caliber or 27 caliber minimum for elk, and of course the shotgun issues. For bear, again, back to centerfire only. That's the only requirement for rifles and handguns as I read it. In turkeys, you allow rim fire as well, and for turkey hunting. And again, I keep throwing this out here because I think this is so important for us to understand the equipment we're talking about, and it is important from a air gun standpoint, because a lot of folks might look at equipment that looks like that and say, wow, I ought to be able to shoot an animal at 150 yards with something like this, just like my rifle. And that's just simply not the case. You have to understand the capabilities of air guns when you pick them up and start using them. That's the hunter responsibility part of it. I think from my standpoint, my gut tells me 40 to 75 yards ought to be the range that somebody shoots. Yeah, there's people that can shoot and hit animals, and you'll see a shot or two of some professional shooters that are hitting targets at quite a range. But I can take my compound bow and I can hit a target consistently at 75 yards. But that target's not got a beating heart and it doesn't take steps. It stands still, and I never take that kind of shot in the woods. And that's the responsibility part of it. These guns will hit the targets. If a professional shooter's got them in their hands, and let me introduce, when I say professional shooters, there's a few people in the audience I want to touch base with. Kevin Wright is in the back here. These guys will all be at the range. When it comes to knowing air guns, I don't know them as well as I know bows, but these guys know air guns. Kevin works for NRA. He's on loan today from and supported by Air Force, which is that larger gun on the bottom. That's an Air Force gun. As a matter of fact, that's the gun he will have out there at the range today, 45 caliber. And then in addition, I've got Rick Ream and his son Ryan are here, and they're supported by Crossman. And the two weapons there at the top, one is the Air Bow, and that is and the other one is the Bulldog. The one in the middle is the Bulldog. You'll have both of those weapons out there today. Now let me just, I want to, on this slide, I guess my lead into this slide is air guns are not your daddy's air guns nowadays. These big bore air rifles are pretty potent pieces of equipment, and you'll see that. The most important thing to recognize here is that tank that is that's on the left-hand side there. That is a tank that you can fill up between 3,000 and 4,500 psi. All of these guns are what we call pre-charged pneumatics. You'll hear me refer to PCPs or pre-charged pneumatic guns. These are not the break barrel type guns that you pump. These are all guns that have that shoot either. I think all of these are 3,000 psi's, but there are some of the air gun industry that's now gone up to 4,500, and they pack a pretty not wallop. And the only other thing I want to mention here is that I won't spend a lot of time talking about air bows. Air bow is a brand name for a Crossman product, a Benjamin air bow. Arrow shooting air guns are just that. They're air guns that shoot arrows. They're not bows. Don't claim them to be bows. The industry doesn't claim them to be bows. It's just a matter of whether or not they're shooting a lead bullet or an arrow. It's the only difference in the two of them. Nobody should say that they're a bow. They don't have limbs. They don't have strings, that sort of thing. All right? Any questions about that before I step on out of this? I want to dive a little bit into the ballistics part of things because this is always where we tend to go, is down in the weeds a little bit. This chart has 3 different air guns up top, and the Crossman Bulldog. If you look on the right-hand side, you're looking at foot-pounds muzzle energy. It's probably on the lower end of the scale of some of the 35 caliber air guns, and the Texan Air Force is probably on the upper end of the scale, and you'll be shooting both ends of that scale this afternoon, so you get a good chance to see that. And there's all variations in between because there are a lot of 45 caliber guns that are pretty potent. There's actually one 50 caliber gun that I know of. Umarex makes. It's called a Hammer, and it's supposed to be out pretty soon. It'll be a little bit more potent, I believe. But everything from handguns down, if I read your all's regulations right, that's legal for deer hunting in the state. I dropped in, this was a slide that was originally set up for Texas, and I dropped in the 38 Smith & Wesson because pulled that off, the information on that one off of one of the websites about what their capability is. But you can see that's a legal handgun here in the state of Pennsylvania, if I read the regulations correctly. And you can see the range there. I don't think anyone should ever equate air guns, even the big bore equipment we're talking about, to rifles. They're certainly not comparable in that respect. They're not even comparable to muzzle loaders nowadays. They may have been comparable to that old 58 caliber Zoov that I started muzzleloader hunting with a long time ago, but not today's inline stuff. But when it comes to pistols, they certainly match up when it comes to foot-pounds of energy. Diving just a skosh deeper on this, remember I talked to you about PCPs early on. That one that's circled on top, well, I should have mentioned when I was talking about big bore air rifles. We normally talk about that from 30 caliber on up is what we call big bore. Almost all big bore air rifles, 30 caliber and above, are PCP platformed. That one on top is a break barrel, and you can see the difference in jump of performance. when you start getting into those PCP equipment. And you can see a comparison, again, just a basic comparison charts there, and the one in red, again, that's that Smith & Wesson, 38 Smith & Wesson with about 200. The 357 Bulldog certainly matches up with that. Getting on up into the larger calibers, the match with pistols, starts to even get clearer. The big issue with the ones that are sort of underperforming on those lists that you just saw is the bullet weight. If you've got small bullet weight, you're going to have a lesser performing piece of equipment. And I know in some states they've talked about a minimum bullet weight might be a potential there. But I don't think, again, if I start thinking about responsible hunters, anybody that would go out even with a 357 Bulldog and try to shoot an 80 caliber bullet, in my opinion, is not what I would call a responsible hunter. But whether or not these will do the trick, there's no doubt in my mind that every air gun that you'll shoot today, including the Bulldog on the lower end of the scale, can kill animals. And I've got a bunch of Alabama, the director in Alabama has sent me a boatload of videos where he's hunted with his 357 Bulldogs and shot deer in Alabama and never had a major problem with them, as long as you're not trying to take a 100-yard shot with them. If you're taking 50-yard shots, you're in good shape with them. These are all professional shooters that have taken these shots. This one was a 95-yard shot with a 45. The gun you'll be shooting this afternoon using a 330 grain bullet. This is that 50 caliber hammer that I was talking to you about earlier that's coming into the market. And this was a 70-yard shot. And all these are, good solid kills. They killed 3 bears just recently with that 50 caliber. And this is a lesser caliber, but again, good shot placement. Animals go down, no problems. So what am I here to ask you about? What am I here to ask you about? I'm here to ask you to start, if you would, to consider air guns as legal for hunting. No real change on on small game. If there was a desire to sit and talk about that, we could certainly talk about it a little bit more. But I think your regs are fine there. If I was doing big game and if I was making a proposal to you, I'd be saying make sure that you mention that it has to have a pre-charged pneumatic platform, PCP platform, and I would be talking about these caliber minimums for your 4 big game species. 35 caliber for deer, and you can, if you feel you need to jump up to something heftier for bear and elk, I'd go with a 45 caliber. If you do that, I don't think you have to step into any further to start measuring bullet weights or foot-pounds of energy or velocities. For turkey, the 17 caliber PCPs will knock down anything out there from turkey hunting standpoint. I don't think you have to worry about that. Seasons, you haven't heard me talk about seasons. Those, I would be recommending that air guns be considered as firearms for the firearm seasons. If you've got a turkey season, since firearms are allowed in the turkey season for you guys, that seems appropriate. Muzzleloader seasons, I think these are not out competing any muzzleloader on the market. They're going to be under competing muzzleloaders, so I don't see why not there. Suburban seasons, I think this is an extremely important area. I call it geographic seasons, but anywhere you've got a high population area and you don't want people shooting high-powered rifles, these guns are good because they don't travel as far, and so there's opportunities there for that. The other thing I would recommend is I'd like to talk to Brian and others more about this, is how we can incorporate air guns into your all's R3 efforts. These are great pieces of equipment for training and getting people that haven't shot before to shoot. They don't have a lot of recoil. Some of the larger stuff you'll see this afternoon does, but there are some, like the 17s that are much nicer and less recoil. They don't have the noise levels. Again, the big guns do, but the lesser ones don't. You can adjust the shot strength for indoor shooting opportunities. We do that often at some of the big shows that the airgun industry has indoor ranges at. And it's less expensive. You're not buying bullets. The pellets that you're shooting at this level would be perfect. Last slide here, that's my information. You've got my card in front of you. This afternoon, I would, again, hope you can come out and get a chance to shoot this equipment. And I'm wide open for questions, and if it gets too deep technically, these guys out here in the audience can certainly help. So, questions?
Yes. So as I look at these, and I have a 17 caliber I own, but are we paying an excise tax on these as we do when we buy firearms or bows?
Actually, the answer to that is no, and I'm glad you brought it up because, like I said, I've got a history with excise taxes, and the only thing that is paid that goes into this, what I refer to as the American system of conservation funding, which excise tax is a big piece of it, is there are import duties paid on these because the import duties consider air guns to be firearms, and so they're all rolled into firearms. On the excise tax, they've never been rolled into firearms. That's what got me involved in this early on when I was talking to the air gun industry was, we're not paying excise taxes. Are you interested in paying excise taxes? About half the industry says yes. The other half says, well, I don't know. I don't want the IRS looking down my throat like they do the firearms side of things. They certainly don't want to be considered firearms because of all of the other issues tied to firearms. But and so I've been talking to them about this particular issue and how we get over this hump because everybody else is a pay-to-play except for these guys. They're not there yet. Some of them are saying, well, I wouldn't mind paying to play if we were in all 50 states. And I said, well, you can't get all 50 states to lean forward until you pay to play, so it's a chicken and egg thing. How do you get this to happen? And it takes, if you start the legislative process today to get excise taxes that go into the tax laws and stuff like that, if everybody in Washington agreed, which is a big if everybody in Washington agreed, it would take you 2 or 3 years to make that happen and actually start collecting them. But the industry says, well, let's see if we can get all 50 states. If we can get all 50 states, maybe. But again, you're trusting the industry on that, on your all side. And so what I've said is, what about things like recruitment? Can we, in some way or another, as an industry, come up with some way to support agency activities that's something less than an excise tax, but something more than what they're doing right now? Can we get engaged in some sort of a grant program where we help support agencies with their recruitment activities? Whether it be equipment, whether it be funding based on the amount of money that we spend. There's a whole lot of ifs on it. I've been sitting down with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies to figure out how we crack that nut. But again, it's a chicken and egg thing. Can we get something going so that the industry feels comfortable? State of Georgia said, we'll do this, but we're gonna pass legislation down there. They have to have legislation on deer issues. They said, we'll pass legislation, but it has to be, we're gonna put a sunset on it 3 years out, and to see if you guys really step to the table like you said you would. And so that's a possibility. I mean, to me, I understand your all's hesitancy because, like I said, I've lived and breathed it for at least the last 20 years of my 40-year career. I understand your all's hesitancy in saying, hey, why should we let you into play when everybody else is paying 11 or 10% excise tax on this. So that's a long way of saying no.
Yeah, and it's a real concern because
Yeah.
if we were to go down this road and allow it for big game, and it truly became a replacement for traditional centerfire rifles, our funding in all the other states is going to go down, and that's not something that we need to have happen.
Yeah, well, I think first thing I'll say is this. I don't think if it ever becomes a replacement for centerfire rifles, I'd be absolutely surprised because, as I said, the capability of this equipment, it's a niche capability. People are not going to go to that unless they're forced to go to that because of suburban issues, rules, regulations, that kind of stuff. Can't shoot a firearm here, but you could shoot an air gun because of safety issues. It's never going to be a replacement. It's going to be an addition to. I can't imagine it going any other way. But bottom line, it is going to be a player that's not paying. And frankly, I'm glad you bring this up, because as I talk to the industry, the more I go back and tell them that I just talked to Pennsylvania, and we were talking to Texas and Georgia and Tennessee, and they're all asking this question. It helps me get them to the point where they need to be to make this move. Other questions?
Any other questions, concerns? I'd really like to get us a copy of your presentation.
It's on this machine right here, so I'm assuming that can happen?
Yeah, we can make that happen.
Okay.
All right, great.
All right. Yeah, and I wish I had thought to bring some of it digested down into a couple of pages, but I didn't. Sorry about that.
That's all right. It's all good.
And I'm anxious again. Hopefully you all can get out there, and if we can get Brian to cut loose with his staff, I'd love to have some of his staff leadership out there too, to see it and try it, shoot them, understand. These are they're pretty interesting pieces of equipment, but it's sort of fun to shoot.
Great.
All right.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you all.
All right, we're going to break for lunch. Oh yeah, we're not coming back. It's a long break.
I want to confirm with you exactly where we're going. The ordinance you gave me and this.